Hey, I just get to hang out here for a long time. And so first of all, I do want to thank the Bankinter Foundation for inviting me, and you as well, Francis. And it's lovely to carry on this conversation that really started, a day and a half ago. And there are so many different bits and pieces that we've heard, and so I'm drawing upon a lot of things that have already been said and maybe packaging them slightly different, still sort of in the frame of this conversation around financing the future that we want, that we need, that we're pushing ourselves forward. And I guess I'm going to take a step back and sort of self-identify as a freshie, but then also, as was acknowledged, even within the freshwater sector, we know that there are these different subdivisions. And the space that I operate in is the development space, so focused on emerging economies in the global south. But the way in which this gets divided, and Katerina also alluded to this, is often water supply and sanitation, as embodied in SDG 6.1, and then also water resource 6.1 and 6.2, and then water resource management, which is pretty much everything else that encompasses SDG 6. And these distinctions are very, very apparent pretty much everywhere that we operate. In most of the countries, the country governments where a lot of us work and operate, they're entirely different ministries. They don't talk to each other, and they see their priorities as very different. And as people were alluding to earlier, politicians, governments tend to really prioritize the water and sanitation, or we would say WASH, because they are prioritizing the delivery of these services to people or their constituents, who are probably angry, as we heard yesterday. However, we've also talked, and there's many representatives here who take a more private sector-oriented approach. The beer reference that Katerina just made, these are more when investments are made by these companies and entities, they're more focused on the water supply and their business, preserving their long-term business. However, the point that I think a lot of us have come to, and I'm just sort of reiterating, is that addressing these two topics, WASH and water resource management, or WRM, continuing to treat them separately is absolutely not sustainable. And again, just sort of painting this sort of cycle here for everybody is that if you cannot continue to provide drinking water and sanitation to populations if there is not a secure water supply. So you have to protect the source if you're really going to continue to do your work. And vice versa, if those services are not, if they are not provided in a safe way, in a safely managed way, as those of us dealing with SDG 6 would understand, then they could actually contaminate our groundwater sources and really damage the supply for everybody, not just the people, but also the environment. So really trying to treat these comprehensively as a whole is absolutely critical. And amazingly, this seems to be rather sort of a new idea. And luckily, it's one that's been gaining a lot of traction, but there's also a, how do we do this? How do we really, really, really do this? And my previous employer, I was working on a job that was really trying to bring together these subsectors in 7 different countries, and really with the premise of joint decision-making, joint problem-solving would be solutions that would be more sustainable for the future. Unfortunately, I wouldn't say we made as many inroads as I would like, but at least we were taking the step forward and really opening up those avenues of conversation and moving us forward. And I guess I won't dig into this as much because I kind of touched on it earlier, but it also was highlighted by other people, and I think Katerina as well, is sort of this issue of water as a human right. And I'm not going to spend overly much time here because, again, we did address it. But what happens is that governments, because they're dealing with addressing angry constituents, they are really locked into a situation where they feel compelled to offer water at prices that are unsustainable, that are too low, that then leave, as you actually opened up, the utilities, providing these services with less than adequate budgets to do a good job. And when that happens, then people don't want to pay for it. None of us want to pay for a subpar service. But actually, the research is there to support the idea that if there is a good service out there that provides things to you that you desire, you will pay for that, right? But unfortunately, we're just stuck in this negative spiral where there's an underinvestment in the resources, in the service delivery. They're stuck, and people don't want to pay for it, and the money just keeps spiraling down. And meanwhile, then and then the new solution is public budgets are insufficient, so we're going to turn to the private sector, and they're going to magically save us. And I think many of you here could chuckle at that, knowing how difficult that is and how unrealistic that is. The same World Bank report that Katarina was highlighting at the beginning of her presentation also highlighted that the private sector investment in the water and sanitation community is 1.7, and they also don't expect that that's going to change dramatically anytime soon. But that notwithstanding, there is this magic expectation that the private sector is going to come in, they're going to save us. However, at the same time, there's this distrust. There's this public distrust and emotions, right? We talked earlier about how emotions get really involved. People don't want to trust the private companies to run infrastructure. They feel that they're going to be at risk of exploitation. And meanwhile, then we have these subpar services that are leaky. We heard references to non-revenue water yesterday. They also actually contribute to CO2 emissions, to methane emissions, and the whole cycle just continues to be unsustainable. So I've talked about this challenge, and so what we face right now is how we can upgrade these services and make them efficient in terms of operations. And a lot of the focus here is on technology and innovation, and we have been making really exciting advances in that regard. And we heard yesterday about desalination. We've talked a bit, but not a whole lot about smart metering and what it can do. We've also talked about different techniques for making irrigation more efficient. This makes water consumption, therefore, more efficient and, in the long term, more sustainable. Paired with this is the price. And whether you are an apartment dweller or you are a farmer, when water is cheap, as one of the speakers definitely highlighted yesterday, you are less conservative about the amount that you use. And a smallholder farmer, same as any of us, is not going to invest in that smart, fancy, water-efficient technology, for example, if the cost of wasting water remains less than the cost of that technology. And I've seen this in recent reports from work I was doing in Tanzania, where they literally surveyed a bunch of farmers, and even though the people who wrote the report were also judgmental about these farmers and suggesting that they were uneducated, they clearly acknowledged that it was a function of price, and that the price mechanism, why upgrade and spend all of the money when it was still cheaper to continue with business as usual. The farmer in this case is absolutely not uneducated. They're making a calculated business decision, just as any of us would do in this room. Building on the above, sustainability is not going to naturally happen because it's a good idea. And we talked about this yesterday as well with consumer behavior, and consumers aren't just going to shift the needle on us. There need to actually be consequences for unsustainable use of water. And it can't be the appeals that are very moving to our future generations. I mean, that is nice and it is important, but it's not actually going to shift in the way that we need. Prices, as I was just talking about, are one very clear consequence that do absolutely need to be adjusted and applied, and we absolutely talked about this yesterday, which was exciting. Of course, it's very challenging to do this. It's very politically tenuous and fraught, and that's why the more we hear people actually saying this and generating movement on it gives me hope, because it does take this kind of action. But there are other forms of consequences that can be applied, and this obviously depends upon context. In a lot of places, a lot of countries where I've worked, what I often hear is, we have really good policies on paper, they're just not enforced. And there need to actually be penalties for this non-compliance that are actually enforced in order for them to have value and achieve their goals. And these are often, through different departments or ministries, water resource boards that are relatively disempowered. They're underfunded. Again, this whole budget challenge. And unless they have the money to do their jobs, business as usual will continue. And as Katarina was highlighting earlier, these are the kind of things that are incredibly unattractive to finance, amongst other things that were mentioned. So incentives can and should, and I'm winding down. Incentives can, should, and I've just talked about the penalties and the consequences, but there should also be incentives. They need to be mixed in here. If the cost of this climate-smart irrigation technology is too high, the government can offer incentives to help drive down that cost. It can be tax breaks. It can be other feed-in tariffs. There can be a lot of other types of techniques that are applied here. And a lot of the achievements that we have made as a social group, as a community, civilization, we look at solar, we can look at wind power, we look at electric vehicles, and all of these have achieved that, have achieved where they are now because they have benefited from these kind of incentivization priorities from their governments. So there's no reason that we should treat water differently if this is the direction we decide we need to move. And I think all of us here would agree that we do. And so I guess the main message I have here is that sustainability has to be nudged. And it does require a mix of carrots and sticks. And I think we're building the momentum to really generate getting us there. Thank you.
Lesley, thank you.